White Sands National Park, New Mexico, the world's largest gypsum sand dune field, 275 square miles of pure white sand stretching to the horizon. Beautiful, pristine, and hiding one of the most explosive archaeological discoveries in human history. Because beneath those dunes, there are tracks, thousands of them, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, fossilized footprints from humans and extinct Ice Age animals preserved in ancient lake beds for 22,000 years. And in 2025, researchers announced something that shatters everything we thought we knew about early human technology. They found drag marks, linear grooves, parallel ridges running alongside human footprints. And what they represent changes everything. The world's first vehicle. Not in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago, not in ancient Sumer with their chariots. Not even close. In North America, 22,000 years ago, 17,000 years before the invention of the wheel. The establishment never wanted you to know this, because it destroys the narrative that technological innovation came from the old world, that civilization flowed from Europe and Asia to the Americas. This discovery proves the opposite, that prehistoric Americans were inventing sophisticated transport systems, while most of the world was still carrying everything on their backs. Let me show you what they found, and why this changes the story of human innovation forever. The discovery came from a team led by Professor Matthew Bennett from Bournemouth University, published in February 2025 in the journal Quaternary Science Advances. And what they documented was extraordinary. Linear traces preserved in dried mud, some stretching 164 feet, others just 6 feet, but all showing the same pattern. Parallel grooves or single lines running alongside human footprints, sometimes crossing the footprints, sometimes running beside them, always showing deliberate human activity. Bennett and his team identified 3 distinct types of tracks. Type 1, deep, narrow grooves that occasionally split into different paths. Type 2, wide, shallow channels running in relatively straight lines. And Type 3, 2 parallel ridges, evenly spaced, consistent with something being dragged across the mud. They ruled out everything else. Mammoths dragging their trunks? No, the patterns don't match. Tree branches blown by wind? Wrong again. No consistent directionality. Boats or sleds? The marks show human control, not random movement. Large animals like giant sloths? The tracks are too narrow, too deliberate. The most parsimonious explanation? They represent drag marks formed by a travois, a simple vehicle made from wooden poles. No wheels, no axles. Just 2 poles, tied together in an A-frame or X shape, pulled by humans across the landscape. Now here's what makes this revolutionary. The wheel is considered the hallmark of transportation innovation. Ancient Mesopotamians get credit for inventing wheeled vehicles around 3500 BCE. That's 5,000 years ago. The entire history of technological progress is supposed to flow from that invention. But these tracks, they predate the wheel by 17,000 years, and they show something even more significant. They show prehistoric Americans had already solved the fundamental transportation problem. How do you move heavy loads efficiently without exhausting yourself? The answer was ingenious. Don't carry the weight, drag it. Use friction to your advantage. Distribute the load across a stable platform. And let the ground do most of the work while you provide directional control. It's so simple it sounds obvious. But it's brilliant. Because a travois doesn't require domesticated animals. Doesn't need wheels or bearings or axles. Just 2 poles, some cordage, and human ingenuity. And the tracks prove it was widespread. Not one inventive family, not a single experimental attempt. The researchers found travois marks across multiple locations in white sands, different track types suggesting variations in design. This was common technology, standard practice, something these people used regularly. Professor Bennett put it perfectly. Basically, it's a wheelbarrow without the wheel, and there's nothing this old. It may represent one of the earliest pieces of evidence for the use of transport technology ever recorded. Let me paint you a picture of what life was like when these tracks were made. 22,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum, the coldest period of the last ice age, massive ice sheets covering much of North America, 2 miles thick in places. Most scientists believe these ice sheets blocked human migration into the Americas, that nobody could have been here. But White Sands tells a different story. Where you see sand dunes today, there was a massive lake, Lake Otero. 1,600 square miles of freshwater fed by snowmelt from surrounding mountains. The shores were lush wetlands, prairie-like grasslands, stands of conifer trees, an ecosystem teeming with life, giant ground sloths browsing vegetation, mammoths with their massive curved tusks, ancient camels, dire wolves, American lions, and humans, families, communities, people who'd been living in this region for thousands of years by the time these tracks were made. The humans left footprints everywhere. Adults, teenagers, children, even toddlers. One trackway shows a teenager carrying a toddler. You can see the footprints change depth and spacing as the teenager adjusts to the weight. Another shows children's footprints following alongside the travois tracks. Kids walking with their parents while goods were transported. It's profoundly human. These aren't just data points, these are lives. Families moving camp, hauling meat from a bison hunt, transporting supplies, a child getting tired and riding on the travois while siblings walk alongside. A community, working together to move heavy loads. And the distances they could cover? With a travois, a human can transport 200 pounds or more. That's the meat from an entire kill. Teepee covers weighing 60 pounds, firewood, tools, everything needed for survival. Without a travois, you're carrying maybe 40 pounds max before exhaustion sets in. The efficiency improvement is staggering. Multiply your carrying capacity by 4, reduce physical strain, free up energy for other tasks. That's the difference between subsistence and prosperity. To verify their findings, Bennett's team did something brilliant. They built replicas, not modern reconstructions, accurate reproductions based on the track patterns and historical travois designs documented in Native American cultures. They took 2 pole designs, one with poles forming a triangle, held at the front, dragging at the joined point, another with an X shape, 2 separate ground contact points for stability. They loaded them with weights matching what humans could realistically transport. Stone tool equivalents, hide bundles, firewood. Then they dragged them across mudflats in Dorset, UK. Clay-rich sediment, perfect for preservation. They photographed every track, measured depression depths, documented the exact groove patterns. Then they flew to Maine, different soil composition, different moisture content, did it again, and the marks they produced, identical to the fossilized tracks at White Sands. Same groove widths, same depression patterns, same occasional splitting where poles shifted, same everything. The experimental archaeology proved beyond doubt. These are travois tracks, human-pulled, deliberately controlled, and they're 22,000 years old. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The historical record shows just how perfect this technology was. When Europeans first encountered Plains tribes in the 16th and 17th centuries, they documented travois in extensive detail. French traders called them travois from the French word travail, to work. And what they witnessed was a transportation system refined over millennia. Dog travois could carry 60 pounds, enough for a family's essential supplies. Teepee poles, dried meat, tools, small children when they got tired. Dogs were harnessed with simple breast straps made of rawhide. The design prevented choking while maximizing pulling efficiency. Then horses arrived, reintroduced by the Spanish after being extinct in North America for 10,000 years, and the travois scaled up. A horse travois could carry hundreds of pounds. Poles got longer, often the actual lodge poles used for constructing tipis, doing double duty. The carrying platforms expanded dramatically. A single horse could do the work of 8 dogs. Suddenly tribes could transport larger teepees, more supplies, greater distances, trade goods, everything needed for a fully mobile lifestyle following the bison herds across the Great Plains. Blackfoot, Cheyenne, Crow, Sioux, Comanche. Every Plains tribe adopted the horse travois, not because they were copying European wagons, but because they were adapting their existing technology to a more powerful draft animal. The fundamental design, 22,000 years old. The innovation, making it bigger when resources allowed. Now let's talk about what this means, because the implications are massive. First, it pushes back the timeline of human technological innovation by millennia. We thought sophisticated transport developed after agriculture, after settled societies, after domesticated animals. Wrong. Mobile hunter-gatherers were engineering transport solutions long before any of that existed. Second, it proves early Americans weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They had the cognitive sophistication to design tools that increased efficiency. They understood mechanics, leverage, friction. They could plan, iterate, improve designs. This is advanced problem solving. Third, and this is the big one, it destroys the Eurocentric model of technological development, the narrative that innovation flows from the old world to the new world, that Native Americans were somehow less advanced because they didn't have wheels when Europeans arrived. But here's the truth. The establishment doesn't want acknowledged. Native Americans didn't need wheels. The travois was perfectly adapted to their environment and lifestyle. Wheels need roads, smooth surfaces, axles that don't break, maintenance, resources. In rough terrain, in forests, mountains, prairies, a travois is superior. It's lighter, more flexible, easier to repair, can go places wheeled vehicles can't. Indigenous peoples across North America used travois right up until the reservation era. first pulled by dogs, then by horses, after the Spanish reintroduction in the 16th century. Not because they were primitive, but because it was the best tool for the job. The discovery also connects to an even bigger controversy. How early were humans in the Americas? The traditional timeline said humans arrived around 13,000 to 16,000 years ago, the Clovis First theory, named after the Clovis culture in New Mexico. For decades, this was gospel. Any evidence suggesting earlier arrival was dismissed, ignored, buried. But White Sands has been systematically destroying that narrative. In 2021, researchers published footprints from White Sands dated to 21,000 to 23,000 years ago, based on radiocarbon dating of seeds found in the footprint layers. The archaeological community went ballistic. Skeptics claimed the seeds were contaminated, that aquatic plants can absorb old carbon from groundwater, making dates artificially ancient. So in 2023, the researchers came back. They used 2 additional dating methods: radiocarbon dating of ancient conifer pollen and optically stimulated luminescence dating of quartz grains. 3 independent methods, all pointing to the same time range, 21,000 Hostler to 23,000 years old. University of Arizona geologist Vance Holliday, who worked on the dating, said it plainly. You get to the point where it's really hard to explain all this away. We now have 55 radiocarbon dates on 3 types of materials: seeds, pollen, and mud, all pointing to the same time period. And now the travois tracks ADD to that evidence, because if humans were using sophisticated transport technology 22,000 years ago, they'd been in North America long enough to develop it, to test designs, to spread the innovation across communities. This wasn't their first generation here, they were established. Some researchers argue humans may have been in the Americas as early as 33,000 years ago. Stone tools from central Mexico suggest that timeline, which would mean humans crossed into North America before the last glacial maximum, before the ice sheets grew massive enough to block migration routes. And that raises fascinating questions. The Bering Land Bridge between Siberia and Alaska, when was it open? How did people cross? Did they come down the coast by boat? Were there multiple waves of migration? The traditional model said people crossed around 15,000 years ago when glaciers melted enough to create an ice-free corridor. But if humans were here 23,000 years ago or earlier, they crossed at a different time, possibly by a different route. And they brought knowledge, skills, and innovative thinking with them. The travois technology might have been crucial to that migration. Imagine trying to cross unknown terrain during an ice age. You need to carry food, tools, shelter materials, firewood. For families, including children, without transport technology, it's nearly impossible. But with the travois, suddenly long-distance migration becomes feasible. Dr. Sally Reynolds, paleontologist at Bournemouth University, put it perfectly. These people were the first migrants to travel to North America, and understanding more about how they moved around is vital to telling their story. Here's what really happened. And this is speculation based on evidence, but it fits perfectly. Humans crossed into North America sometime between 30,000 and 25,000 years ago, probably along the Pacific coast. They brought sophisticated hunting skills, stone tool technology, and crucially, the concept of using tools to reduce physical labor. Over thousands of years, they spread across the continent, adapting to different environments, developing new techniques. And somewhere along the way, probably independently in multiple places, they invented the travois, because the physics are simple once you start thinking about efficiency. By 22,000 years ago, travois technology was standard across many communities. Different designs for different purposes. Triangle frames pulled from the front, X-shaped frames with 2 ground contact points for stability, single-pole designs for lighter loads. This wasn't primitive. This was engineering, iterative design, testing what worked, spreading successful innovations through trade and contact between groups, building a technological tradition that would last 20,000 years. And then, the Ice Age ended. Lake Otero dried up around 10,000 years ago. The wetlands became desert. The tracks were buried under sediment, then covered by gypsum sand blown from the dry lake bed. Preserved, waiting, until winds and erosion exposed them for modern researchers to find. What else is buried under those sands? What other innovations are waiting to be discovered? How much of human history have we missed because we weren't looking for it? Or worse, because the evidence didn't fit the approved narrative? The establishment wants neat timelines, simple stories, technology developing in predictable stages, civilization originating in the Fertile Crescent and spreading outward. But reality is messier. Humans are innovative everywhere. Solutions get invented independently in different places at different times, based on local needs and available resources. The travois proves that, a wheelless vehicle that worked perfectly for its environment. invented in the Americas thousands of years before anyone in Mesopotamia thought to attach a disc to an axle, not because Americans were more advanced, but because they solved the problem they faced with the resources they had. Well, that's the real lesson here. Innovation isn't linear. It's not a ladder with primitive at the bottom and advanced at the top. It's a toolkit, different solutions for different problems. And judging one culture's tools by another culture's standards is missing the point. Indigenous peoples developed what they needed, astronomical observations rivaling Greek achievements, sophisticated agriculture producing crops Europeans had never seen, medicine from plants that modern pharmacology is still studying, mathematical concepts including zero independently invented in Mesoamerica, and yes, transport technology that worked for 22,000 years without needing to be improved. The travois tracks at White Sands aren't just about one invention. They're about recognizing that every human population innovates, that early Americans were just as intelligent, creative, and technologically sophisticated as anyone else, that dismissing their achievements because they didn't develop the same technologies as Eurasia is, well, it's colonialism dressed up as scholarship. Professor Bennett compared the scene to something perfectly modern. Many people will be familiar with pushing a shopping trolley around a supermarket, moving from location to location with children hanging on. This appears to be the ancient equivalent, but without wheels. That comparison is brilliant, because it humanizes these ancient people. They weren't alien, they weren't mysterious, they were families, doing the same things we do, trying to make life easier, carrying their kids, moving their stuff, solving problems with cleverness and creativity. And 22,000 years later, their tracks are still there, telling their story, proving their ingenuity, showing that humans in North America were inventing world-changing technology long before recorded history began. The establishment will continue denying it, downplaying it, finding reasons why this doesn't count as real transportation innovation, why wheels are more important than travois, why the timeline needs more research. Even with 55 concordant radiocarbon dates, you'll hear arguments like, it's just dragging, as if that somehow diminishes the innovation. Or they didn't have real civilization, as if sedentary agriculture is the only valid human achievement. Or where are the artifacts? Ignoring that nomadic peoples carried everything they owned and rarely lost tools they couldn't replace. The bias is transparent. If this discovery happened in Mesopotamia, it would be front-page news, museums would be building exhibits, documentaries would be commissioned. We'd hear about the revolutionary breakthrough in prehistoric transportation. But because it happened in the Americas, suddenly it's interesting but inconclusive. Suddenly we need more evidence. Suddenly 22,000 years of successful use doesn't count because they never progressed to wheels they didn't need. That double standard reveals everything. It's not about the evidence. It's about protecting a narrative where technological innovation flows from certain places to others, where some cultures are advanced and others are primitive, where history has a predetermined direction and any evidence contradicting it gets minimized. But the evidence doesn't lie. The tracks are there. The dates are solid. The experimental archaeology confirms it. This is real. Americans invented the world's first vehicle 22,000 years ago during the Ice Age, using nothing but wood, cordage, and human ingenuity, 17,000 years before the wheel. And it worked so well that indigenous peoples used it for 22 millennia. That's not primitive. That's not pre-civilized. That's brilliant. That's sustainable. That's a technology so well adapted to its purpose that it didn't need to change. And now you know the truth. The next time someone tries to tell you that Native Americans were technologically backward, you can tell them about White Sands, about the tracks in the sand, about the families who walked those shores 22,000 years ago, pulling their travois, raising their children, and inventing the world's first vehicle. The question is, what else don't we know? What other innovations are buried under sediment and sand and institutional bias? How much of human history has been erased simply because it didn't fit the narrative? The White Sands discovery opens the door. It proves we need to look, to question assumptions, to take seriously the evidence, even when it challenges everything we thought we knew. Because out there in those dunes, there are more tracks, more footprints, more stories waiting to be told, stories of ingenuity and survival and human creativity stretching back into the depths of the Ice Age. And every one of them matters. Every track is a window into lives lived, problems solved, innovations created by people, our ancestors, who were just as smart, just as creative, just as human as we are. The 22,000-year-old tracks at White Sands aren't just about the past. They're about recognizing human potential, about understanding that innovation happens everywhere when people face challenges and apply their intelligence to solving them. So what do you think? Does this change how you view early Americans? Should we rethink the entire timeline of human technological development? And what else might be out there waiting to be discovered? Drop your thoughts below. Because this is a conversation that needs to happen. The story of human history is being rewritten, and White Sands is just the beginning. If you want more suppressed discoveries that challenge the official narrative, subscribe. Because there are more stories like this, innovations attributed to the wrong cultures, timelines that don't add up, evidence ignored because it's inconvenient. We're exploring every one of them, and we're just getting started.